chapter, I look at the links between decentralization and local development. After reviewing the literature, I concluded that it's actually quite hard to really find evidence that there's a very strong link. It really depends on context. It depends to a great extent, obviously, what kind of reform are we talking about? What is the legal framework? How many responsibilities have actually been devolved? In what areas? Are they developmentally important, those areas? Are we talking health, education? Or are we talking street lighting, garbage collection, which are more typically the things that local governments are allowed to do? Obviously, roads construction is also an area where sometimes local governments play a big role and sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's the Ministry of Public Works that essentially steered and decides. So in principle, there are studies that have seen a great link between decentralization and local development, and then there are others which hardly find any impact, and that has to do with the local context, with the structure of the government, and as I said, what decentralization, what local development do we actually want to look at? Morocco is an interesting case study because, as you may know, Morocco also experienced the Arab Spring in 2011, which quite widespread protests, and they were quite a lot of them. They were mainly about socioeconomic grievances, unemployment, also the lack of local services such as health and education. It was in a way good timing from the government's perspective because this plan was ready and they were able to pull it out of the drawer and couch it as also a constitutional reform, of which this regionalization or advanced regionalization aspect was the most important one. What was really important is that they created regional assemblies, which for the first time would be directly elected, whereas beforehand they were indirectly elected. That's why it is an interesting case study to look at, and then also to see how is that reform being used maybe to also shore up the regime and its legitimacy. So upgrading authoritarianism is a phrase I'm borrowing, and not just me, quite a few scholars have done so by now. And it's basically about giving sort of authoritarian regimes upgrading themselves in terms of getting the appearance of being more democratic in a sort of perennial transition towards democracy, by which they can leverage also more funding from international donors. I think this advanced regionalization in Morocco is a case of authoritarian upgrading because it does create new democratic structures, these regional parliaments, if you like, brings the government closer to the people, if you like, at this level at least, the regional level. But at the same time, you can also see evidence that while this is going on, there's also another tendency, which is that the power is also concentrated still at the level of the Ministry of the Interior, which is obviously one of the main pillars of the Moroccan regime. Because, for example, they still have a regional governor, which has lost some of his powers, that's for sure, because it went to the regional president. But at the same time, this governor is now heading a new structure, a deconcentrated coordination body. And in that new body, which was created by the Deconcentration Charter of 2018, the regional assembly president doesn't actually figure in there. So at the same time, you have these new elections, and you have regional elections, and you have new regional parliaments, but at the same time, you have new structures being created where it seems like the real decisions are being made, and much more. We're talking about much larger sums of public funding, in which in those bodies things are really being decided, which have a much bigger also developmental impact finally. I mean, if we talk about the link between decentralization development, then I think we should be more critical to see where can we expect this development to come from. There are scholars such as Wunsch and Dikovic and others who talk about a decentralization paradox, because while the legal framework and the new structures that have been created would lead one to believe that decentralization is actually taking place, at the same time, in practice, it's not really happening because financial resources are not being decentralized that are needed to exercise those new legal responsibilities, and it actually gives more power to entrenched national level actors. This is the paradox of decentralization in a way that outwardly it looks fine, and but also it's very nice quote here by Dikovic and Beatty Riedel about the fact that decentralization appears to have changed the structure of government more than the quality of governance. So what is interesting to us as researchers is, of course, not so much the structure, but really quality of governance. What does it mean now, this new structure? Does it really improve state-society relationships? Does it really improve the accountability linkages? Ultimately, also questions of citizenship come up because people identify differently with a local government if they feel more closely related to or taken seriously by their elected councillors.